ahead and get started. My name is Joe Vidunas. I'm the TAC chair. Janice, would you mind taking roll and certifying that we have a quorum?
Sure. Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Here.
Charles City County, Vice Chair Mitchell. Ms. Russell.
Here.
Thank you. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Walker. Goochland County, Mr. Goyne. Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Chair Vidunas.
Here.
Henrico County, Ms. Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Ure. New Kent County, Ms. Inman. Ms. Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Ciriello. Mr. Chardine. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Good morning, here.
Good morning. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky. Mr. Wagner.
Here.
Thank you. GRTC, Ms. Robinson. Here. Plan RBA, Mr. Bushing.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. EDOT, Ms. Rhodes.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Mueller. And Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale. And Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. Let me. We have a quorum.
Thank you for that, Janice. Item 3, consideration of amendments to the agenda. Does anybody wish to amend the agenda in any way? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 4, approval of the November 14, 2023 meeting minutes. I guess I would ask, are there any changes or amendments to the meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, by voice vote. Oh, okay. May we have a motion for?
I'll make the motion, John O'Keefe.
Okay, John. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you for the second. All right.
Now vote voice vote.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, minutes are approved. Moving to the next item, item 5, is an opportunity for members of the public to comment. Do we have anybody present or virtual that would like to address the TAC?
We have not received any requests from anyone online.
Okay, no request online, seeing no request here in person. We'll close the public comment period and move to the TAC Chairman's report. I'll be brief. I have nothing to report at this time. So now into the meat of the agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Miles, and he's going to take this item concerning Smart Scale Round 6 applications.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first item we have today is just a discussion item for Smart Scale Round 6 and regional candidate projects. So just as a reminder to everyone, Smart Scale is the principal funding program for transportation in Virginia. We had a call for projects last meeting, and we were asking for projects from our Connect RVA 2045 plan that would also meet one of the VTrans needs. The TPO and also the Planning District Commission are eligible applicants, and the TAC recommendations will help to shape both of those project selections. So getting into the most important part, the decision was to wait to take any action on this until we heard from the CTB. So the CTB met on the 4th and did make some changes to the program. Just want to briefly go through those. The technical guidance will be coming out this month for the draft, and I guess next month for the final. So we'll have the full details at that point. But there were no changes to the application limits. So we did wind up keeping the same number. And I will say this was a 9-hour meeting, so this was a lot to get through all of the different items that they covered. They did vote to eliminate land use completely as a factor. So land use is no longer part of your scoring. It's just going to be the other 5 that have always been part of Smart Scale. The weight that was on land use has been shifted over to safety and congestion. So those 2 items will now make, I believe it's 50% of the score between the 2 of them. The high priority projects were reduced in terms of which project categories are eligible. And I'll go over that in a little bit more detail. It wasn't as severe as had been originally proposed. Step 2 in the prioritization process was eliminated, so high priority projects are now strictly statewide. So there is no more keeping money within the district first and then going to the statewide competition. On economic development, there were changes to 2 of the different measures. The first one changed from the process where we all uploaded site plans and zoning approvals and that really tedious effort to looking at the Virginia Scan database, which all the localities are already using, is our understanding. So that's going to be the basis for identifying those economic development sites. The other piece of it is a switch on freight measurement from tonnage to volume. So those are the 2 freight measures. And then congestion, the original proposal had been moving back to 10 years out, which is what it was used in Smart Scale round 1 and 2. And where we settled was at 7 years out, which was intended to match the 6-year funding program. So basically right after the SIP is completed and that project has had all its funding, what would the congestion be looking like when construction would be completed essentially? So those were a quick overview of all the changes, and we'll get more details on that from the technical guide. The next thing I wanted to go into was the high priority projects eligibility. So this is the part that most impacts the TPO. So we can only apply for high priority projects. We're not eligible for district grant. So we can only pick projects from this pool, I guess you could look at it that way. So new capacity projects, so new lanes, new roadways and alignments, any sort of managed lane and new bridges. The new and improved interchanges, that's a pretty broad category that covers really any interchange improvements. Transit and freight improvements, this is really focused on fixed guideway and rail. So light rail, BRT, transfer stations, freight rail improvements, passenger rail improvements. So it's really more focused on those bigger transit and freight improvement types. And then the new category, this is what changed from what had been originally proposed. It was the other improvements. So this is preferred alternatives, any recommendations that came out of STAR studies, pipeline studies, AMP studies, or anything out of an MPO study. There was some caveats in the discussion about the project having to be regionally significant, but that does give us a lot more flexibility. So we have a broader list of projects, anything that came out of the studies, which when you look at it, most of what we've submitted in the past did come out of one of these studies. So this kind of redeemed a lot of the project types that we otherwise would have lost. We got a lot more flexibility there. So what I wanted to go over was the projects that we've received so far, and we're still waiting on some projects. We didn't have time to review these in depth, obviously, since the deadline was the 8th for today's meeting. But just briefly to go through what we've received and then open it up for discussion so the TAC can review the different project types that we have on the list and sort of a strategy of how we want to approach moving into this since there have been such large changes to the program. So under the capacity type projects, we have 2 auxiliary lane projects on 288, Route 33 widening in Hanover, Route 1 widening in Ashland, Route 5 and New Osborne Turnpike improvements in Henrico and the city of Richmond, Jude's Ferry Road widening in Powhatan, Red Lane Road realignment in Powhatan, 360 Woodlake Village to Otterdale in Chesterfield, and then Huguenot Road congestion improvement, which is widening between Robius and Cranbeck. So we have several projects in that category. Interchanges, we had quite a few, so I-95 and 54, I-64 and Route 106 in New Kent, short pump area improvements, which is North Gayton and the associated improvements there, 2 different Gaskins Road interchange projects in Henrico, and then Route 360 and I-64 interchange. And then 2 more, I-95-10 and 288-360 southbound collector distributor road. So both of those, I think we've seen before, either different funding programs as well. Nothing has been submitted so far in the transit and freight category as far as we've seen. So that is an area where we still have opportunity if there's additional projects that somebody would like considered in that category. The other project types that we've seen, the Mayo Bridge replacement, eligibility concerns there since it is a bridge project that's already funded. And so I don't know if we need to go that route on this one. But the other three, we had US 60 522, Busy Street Extension in Chesterfield, and Route 60 corridor enhancements. All three of those come out of different studies, Route 60 studies, and there's a separate study for Midlothian Village projects that the TPO funded. So all of those come out of studies, which likely will bring it in the eligibility. We just have to wait and see what the final rules are on that guidance when it comes out in the technical guide. So what we wanted to do today was just open this up for discussion, really to see if there's any areas where there's a broad consensus on approach of, should we be prioritizing those high cost projects with the shift to a truly statewide prioritization, or should we be focusing on the ones that have been a little bit more successful in the past? Like what approach should we be taking when we're looking at these projects? The other thing is we're not asking for any action today. We're just trying to get some guidance so staff can help to prioritize these, because our goal for the next meeting is to come back with a recommended list of 12 for the pre-applications, and then the additional 5 that we can recommend to the policy board to recommend to Plan RVA. So that's the goal out of this. I'm happy to answer any questions about anything that I've covered, but otherwise we just wanted to have a discussion.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Miles. A lot to digest. Does anybody have any initial thoughts or comments about the projects that have been submitted so far as candidates? Hi, Nora.
Hi.
You want to help me out? Yes, Nora,
Okay.
please.
I just have a couple of questions. Well, first, the 2 projects we got last round, we wouldn't get in the next, we wouldn't have gotten with the new guidelines, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. And you said that you hadn't gotten any freight projects or rail projects. Do you think that's because it's hard for a rail project to show regional significance? And I have more questions.
Sure, I think part of that is just we don't generally do a lot in the rail space. So I think most of the projects the localities are working on are either road or transit related. I think the other piece is that the transit project types have been limited down to only those fixed capacity or fixed guideway, which is a big change. So we're down to only the BRT or the rail projects. We don't really have the smaller stop improvements and sidewalk, which is what in the past we would have looked at. So if those come out of the STAR studies or something like that, we could still look into those. They wouldn't fall under that transit category, I think is where, just on that breakdown.
And I saw Richmond hadn't submitted their applications yet,
Correct.
so they might have a transit project. Has Barb Nelson with the port, was she notified about the request for these applications?
No, so this was just from the TAC meeting
Just
that
from
we
TAC?
had.
Okay. Does she usually just reach out to the locality, like if it's a city project at the port, does she just usually reach out to the city and try to coordinate application through them?
Yeah, so usually the port will either reach out directly to us and ask how we can get a project in, or work with one of the localities who's willing to put it in. So depending on where it's at.
Thank you.
So how many
Yes,
apps
Barb.
do you have? Sorry, Joe. How many applications?
As of right now, there's 21 on here. So we have 17 slots for the pre-apps. So it's a better situation than we've been in some years.
I also was wondering whether Sarah Rhodes was on. I thought maybe she could share some insight or some advice about how she thinks maybe round 6 will go.
Yes, hi everyone. Good morning. I wish I'd gotten my act together to be there in person. It's a little strange being a disembodied voice, but good morning, everyone. Yes, I think Miles did a great job giving a summary of where we are and what the CTB's actions are. I would say there is a lot more to come from this, and of particular concern is how project readiness is going to be handled. I don't know if any of you caught the 9-hour meeting. Miles was a trooper, but the discussion with app limits really went hand in hand with a discussion about reinforcing or pushing forward stronger readiness requirements and having the board support screen outs when applications are incomplete. And so that was a very big point in that conversation. As we now have a policy in place, or we're very close to having a policy in place, it's very likely we're going to see more robust readiness requirements. Not that the documentation would be much different from what you've previously seen, but how complete that documentation is likely to be a factor in whether an application can advance. Further, and this has been explained throughout the update process, readiness is going to be front-loaded. And so applications that are determined to be incomplete or unready at the time of final submission won't even make it through scoring. For the last 5 rounds, if there's been a readiness concern, districts and applicants have done their best to try and clean that up in validation. That will no longer be an option this round. So this looks like a great list. It looks like we're still missing some information, but anything coming from any of you, anything that is advancing, especially for a large scale interchange projects, I would really encourage you to consider readiness and how complete things like the IAR or the alternatives analysis are as you are advancing those applications.
Thanks, Sarah. Sarah, could you elaborate a little bit more on what does readiness mean in terms of an application? What types of things are we talking about to be considered ready?
So there's the holistic term of readiness that's been around for all 5 rounds is how complete is your application? Do you have all the required documents for your application to advance? And each round, the standard for readiness has expanded, especially for larger scale projects. So at a very basic level, if you're doing an interchange improvement or requesting funding for an interchange improvement, an IAR, at this point, the language is draft or final IAR, will need to be included in your application in order for it to be scored as a part of round 6. If you are doing any sort of widening or capacity expansion, an alternatives analysis of some kind will need to be included with your application in order for that application to be determined to be ready. So holistically, Joe, the readiness applies to all the required documentation that is necessary for a complete application. But this round in particular, we're moving into more specificity of very clear documentation that must be associated with your application in order for your application to advance to scoring. The bigger the project, the more complete the requirement is. So I saw those 6 or so, maybe 7 interchange projects on your list, Miles. All of those will need a certain level of documentation. And forgive me, I don't know the exact language on that yet. We're still working through that, but they will need a certain level of documentation to be scored. And so I would really encourage you all to put your best foot forward. I'm hoping early in the new year to have some sort of readiness guidance for all of you so you can make decisions about what applications get into the mix. And we have, my goal is to be the districts with the least amount of screen outs. So I want to support you as much as I can on that.
Perfect, Sarah. Yeah, so one of the projects that I submitted for consideration was I-95 54 interchange, and based upon your description, it would not be considered ready at this point. It's currently undergoing a study, so round 7, I would think that we would be ready. So I think, Miles, one of the first things you had mentioned that you didn't have an opportunity yet to really kind of screen or vet the list of projects that have been submitted, and I think a few more will probably be coming in, is to look at that readiness question right off the bat, and I think we could probably strike quite a few, although that's not the goal.
I'd rather not strike that one. It's my understanding that that information will be ready by March. That's what they've told us, so that we can apply for Smart Scale.
Okay.
I wouldn't recommend striking anything at this time.
Yeah.
in the new year. We'll have a status. Many of these are studies that VDOT is involved in. We'll have a status for you all on what's feasible and what isn't.
Thanks, Nora. Thanks, Sarah, for clarifying that. Yeah, I mean, the goal is not to, we're not trying to eliminate, but if something is obviously not going to be ready, and hopefully 9554 is, I wasn't aware that they're going to be complete in March, but yes, those would be the types of things we'd be looking at.
Sharon has a question.
Yes, Sharon, online.
Sorry, I don't see it.
Sorry, need to unmute. Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to provide an update just about some of the Henrico's interchange projects that we submitted. Short pump improvements is very important. That one, we have an approved IAR, and we applied for CVTA regional funding and applied for an MPDG grant. The Gaskins 2 interchanges, we have an approved IMR or IAR on that, and we had completed studies. Trying to think the other, 360 and I-64, that was a pipeline study that was submitted last round and seems to score pretty well. But that's just wanted to fill you in about the interchanges that Henrico submitted. Thank you.
Was there any discussion during that 9-hour marathon session about the cost benefit? My sense is that in the past rounds, you know, the projects with the really large benefits, if they had the large price tag along with it, weren't doing as well as other projects. Was that subject discussed, and any insights as to where how that factors into our decisions here?
I mean, it came up a lot in the discussion. I think various CTB members had ideas of how to support projects more strongly if they had leveraging funds as opposed to just buying down the cost. But at the end of the day, I don't think there were any policy changes that would impact the cost benefit. In fact, the old system of the high priority projects, what they just got rid of, in step 2, it was cost benefit. In step 3, it was strictly benefit statewide. And they got rid of that. So the whole system is now cost benefit statewide. So they've actually moved more firmly toward the cost benefit analysis.
Yes, Barb?
So with that in mind, you know, it has always shaken out that the less expensive projects fare better. There seems to be a bigger focus on congestion and safety. And when we think about our region's typology, we're pretty evenly split across congestion, safety, and accessibility. So I don't know what conclusion you can make from that, other than cheap is good. Cheap always seems to win. Yeah.
And so what would be a cheap project, or what would be the cost of a cheap project? Is we're 10, 20, 30 million versus hundreds of millions? Like,
Well, Miles did the whole exercise last time and kind of cracked the code, and it seemed to be around 12 million.
So, I mean, what we can do, part of what we asked for this time was how much expected leverage there was for each of the projects. So we can take a look at what's been submitted before and sort of guesstimate where the cost benefit score would land for those based on the amount of leverage and the available estimate. But we don't have, for anything that's new and hasn't been submitted before, we don't have a baseline to go off of.
Right, and you know, just with all the changes to the process, you know, going up, kind of comparing to round 5 to predict round 6, that's gonna be challenging because there have been these pretty big changes. But just have to do our best. Hopefully 6 to 7 will stay a little stable. So we can learn some lessons from 6 and really do well in 7.
You're optimistic, I don't know. So we do have a question from Sharon. I'm going to read the question. When does the city plan to submit their projects? Is it allowed for them to submit after the deadline has passed?
Yeah, so we expect to get those this week from the city. Basically what it comes down to, there was a medical reason, so we're to accommodate staffing needs. We give them a little flexibility to get those in. Since we weren't actually taking a vote on anything this week, we thought it was fine because staff still needs to evaluate everybody else's projects as well. So we'll be working on that for the January meeting.
I don't have any issues with that. Okay, does anybody have any other comments? This is discussion. What really is going to happen next, Miles?
So next steps, what I'm going to bring back for the next meeting is a list with all of the 21 plus whatever additional projects we receive, with a review of readiness, making sure it meets a high priority project need, make sure it meets a VTrans need, and then making sure that we have all the documentation that would be required as best as we can tell for that project. And once we have that list, I think that'll allow staff to make a recommendation on the preferred 12. And we'll also be looking at leveraging, I think, as I mentioned, so looking at the cost benefit side of it. And we'll be able to make a recommendation on the preferred 12 from staff, and then TAC will have that to respond to and have the full list to swap things out as needed. So that's our plan. So for January, we'll have 12 nailed down for what the TPO should submit, and then also another 5 prioritized to eventually recommend over to Plan RVA for the commission.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you. So I just have a quick question. So I apologize if you covered this earlier. When will we know about the RSTPBG funding and the CBTA regional money? I think we're going to know that within the next week or two. Can you clarify? Because I'm still not sure when we're going to know the results of all that.
I believe for CBTA is for January to TAC have their review, and so that'll be finalized by the February CBTA meeting. So that would be all locked down before we get to pre-apps. For RSTP CMAC, the plan is to have it finalized in March is our target. So it'd be a little bit into the pre-application period, but only by a couple days because the TPO meets early in the month.
That's when it'll be finalized, but
Yes.
when will we know the results?
So that's when the policy board, that's the final decision, but TAC will have made a recommendation in February
Okay.
to finalize that. So I think we'll have a recommendation for both by the time you're in February and seeking board approvals for your
Okay.
projects as well, your local applications, as well as these regional ones. So there's going to be a delay on that leveraging in terms of when we make our recommendation, but it's a scheduling
We're gonna
challenge because we need time to also put these together, and coordinating with the district to make sure we get everything that we need to get these projects moved forward. So that's kind of the timeline. We're doing as best as we can to try and line everything up, but I think we're doing better than in the past because we didn't have this leveraging option and we weren't actively trying to line up with Smart Scale.
Okay, good, thanks.
We do have another question, Sharon.
Or Sarah.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sarah, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, not to hijack the agenda item, but there's a few things I'd just like to add here, and the timing seems appropriate. I would remind everybody that the MPO quarterly is this afternoon, and there should be more insight into the Smart Scale next steps. Also, the Smart Scale technical guide will be released this month, and so that'll help provide some guidance to application development strategy. So there is more to come this month that can help support that. The other item, and this is a request on my end, I was going to save it for the VDOT update, but Amy brought up RSTPBG, so I thought I'd just do it now. With permission from the TAC, I'd like the opportunity to take your RRTPO applications that have been submitted and move them into the pre-scoping module of the SMART portal. This will give us an opportunity to run estimation reviews from there and create some structures, initial structure to applications that can potentially be moved into other programs, most notably Smart Scale as it comes up. There are 35 new applications and then an additional 10 to 12 of existing projects. VDOT would move them into the Smart Portal pre-scoping module. I don't know if you've had a familiarity with the pre-scoping module, but it's basically scope, schedule, estimate. We'd also upload the supporting documentation that was provided with the application. Information and feedback could be provided to all of you and to Miles through the Smart Portal rather than an offline process. And it gives an opportunity to note leverage. And I can make some preliminary conversations about smart scale application and readiness there rather than via email. So I'd like the opportunity to move forward with that if everyone is comfortable with that approach.
Anybody have any concerns with that? Seems like a good thing. Okay, Sarah, I think you got the green light.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next item. Miles is going to handle that one as well to discuss safety target performance measures for 2024.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So this is a second discussion item for today, and this is for the annual roadway safety targets. So as you all are aware, every year we have to set a safety target across, there's 5 different performance measures that we look at. And the state also has to set those target in those same areas. Basically, the requirement is once the state adopts a target in the summer, we have to adopt it within 180 days after that, which puts our deadline at February 29th. So last year, when we were setting the targets, there was a desire from the board and at the TAC level to dive a little bit more deeply into what these targets do, how can we set them, and part of that is that the modeling from the state is suggesting increased fatalities. And so our target was going up on fatalities, and that's not obviously the direction that we want to see. So the idea on today's discussion is really to review where we are today, sort of the baseline and information that's been provided from the state, look at sort of the general practice, the best practices across from what Federal Highways has put together in terms of approaches you can take to target setting, and then just try and get a consensus around a direction, and staff can come back next month with actual numbers for you to recommend up to the board. But we wanted to set a sort of a guideline of what sort of framework to use first. So again, the performance targets, and each of these are based on 5-year averages, is fatalities, serious injuries, non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, and then fatality rate per 100 million VMT, and serious injury rate per 100 million VMT. So those are the things that we're looking at. One of the notes that I have on the slide is to be able to set these targets, we also have to have a projection of vehicle miles traveled as well. So if you're looking at a rate 2 years out, you have to have an idea of what that, the bottom of that equation is. So this also requires us to have some level of a VMT projection. So what we get every year from the state is basically a table like this. What it lays out is the projection based on modeling, and I'll go a little bit into the detail of how this all works, but where we are today on the 5-year average, where the modeling suggests we'll be by the target year, and then it calculates the difference. And then based on that, it gives us an annual % change that would be needed to achieve that. If the modeling suggests that it's going up, that's an annual increase that it would show. If the modeling suggests it's going down, it'd be an annual decrease. And so this is the actual table that we have for this year. So it's showing a projected decrease in VMT, increase in fatalities, a decrease in serious injuries, and then an increase on non-motorized injuries and fatalities. So Federal Highways has done a study, looked at all the states across the country and looked at how targets are set. And they've basically identified 3 main approaches on how you set your targets for safety. So the first of those is a data-driven approach, which is really focusing on current trends to develop a target for the upcoming year. The rationale behind this is since these are based on 5-year averages, it's hard to bend that curve on a year to year. So you should be looking really at where the trend lines are, what the data is showing you, where it's headed, and then set a target that's realistic. So Virginia has a very complex model. So this has been in place since 2020, I believe, but it looks at VMT, socioeconomic data, weather, liquor sales, maintenance of the system, behavioral programs that DMV is doing, It looks at what we're spending in HSIP and Smart Scale and which of those projects are opening in the next year, which should have an impact on safety. So it's a very complicated model, and that's sort of the foundation for all of the work that we do. You can also use more simplified models to look at this. So, just taking a trend line over the past 10 or 15 years, taking a short-term trend line over the past 5 years. So those are also viable options. And this is the approach that we've been following.
Marios, what's M&O?
Oh, maintenance and operations.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So this is an example of like what that would look like for our region based on fatalities and where we are today. So these are a couple different trend lines. So there's a recent trend line, which is like the last 5 years, just extrapolating from that trend line, a long-term trend line, which is extrapolating since 2010 onward, and then the modeling from the statewide target. So that kind of gives us a range of like what would be realistic based on different trend lines, looking at where those are. As you can see, the near term and the target from the statewide modeling are both significantly continuing that upward trend line on fatalities. An alternative approach, and what you could think of would be kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, would be a goal-driven approach. So this is focusing on the overall long-term goal of reducing fatalities and serious injury crashes, which means you often don't even look at the baseline trend and where things are going. The goal is to go down. So that is problematic in as much as you're going to miss the target more often, especially when you have trend lines like we're seeing now where things are going up. But that does allow to then have additional conversations about safety, where our investment priorities are. So it opens up the door to have more of a focus on safety in our program. The CTB has adopted a goal-driven target for internal purposes, which is a 2% annual decline. And that was based on our strategic highway safety plan. So the Arrive Alive plan is a 2% decrease per year. So that's what the CTB has adopted, but that's an internal target, not the external target that's been set for federal highways. So what that could look like, this is just showing a 2% decline. So that would basically say where we are is as high as we want to go, and we want to just keep going down. So we'd set our target for 2% decrease for the next 3 years from 21 out to 24 and use that number as setting the target. Again, the challenge with this is you're more likely to miss your target. For us, it doesn't have the same consequences as it does for the state. So when the state has missed targets, they have to spend a certain amount of money that comes from the HSIP program on safety, and so that it changes their spending and what they can do. They also do additional studies to basically study how the HSIP program is working. For us, it doesn't carry those same consequences, but it does look like we may not be setting good targets on that side. So there's that challenge. So then there's the middle ground, which is really the hybrid approach, which basically you look at the data, but you keep that big picture goal in mind. So you're looking at the current trends and projections, but you basically say only a flat or downward target is acceptable because, again, we're still trying to get towards zero. We don't want to go up. That's not a target at that point. And that's actually the approach that the CTB has taken for 2024. So I mentioned this at the beginning, but the rules have changed. So states can only set level or declining targets now. So what that would look like is we recognize that the trend line is up. We don't want an upward trend line. We want to go down. But recognizing the reality, we're going to set a level target. So for 2024, we want to hold fatalities even from where they are today. And that's just trying to find that middle ground between our goal and where we want to be and where the trend is now. Again, reflecting a big picture that it's a 5-year average. It's hard to bend that curve quickly within a year or two. So those are kind of the three main approaches. And these can apply across safety, across fatalities, across serious injuries. It's kind of a broad brush on what we can do there. But the goal for today, what we wanted to have was just a discussion about which of these approaches we should be looking at and where you want staff to develop the targets for the upcoming year. So then we can come back for the January meeting and provide actual numbers and the calculations and how we got there for you to be able to recommend that to the policy board. Again, our due date is February 29th, so we need it for the February board meeting, but we wanted to make sure there was a chance to have the discussion first before we just brought numbers. And I think that's one of the challenges we didn't have in the past. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on this. But again, otherwise, this is just a discussion and trying to get some direction for staff.
Who would like to get us started? Barb?
Like the flag.
Well, so I think, I think the question really is of the three approaches that were described,
The hybrid.
which one?
The hybrid.
The hybrid, okay, yes.
I agree, that seems the most accomplishable.
So Miles, I don't know if this data is available or not, but it would be good to look at the fatalities caused by design faults and fatalities caused by human behavior. Because the design faults is something which we can correct. Human behavior you can predict. So I don't know if this is the data we have or not, but I had actually mentioned this in the quarterly meeting as well. And they said they will look at it, but this is something we can talk about.
Yes, Barb?
Yeah, along those lines, I think that's why it's good that we've got the statewide highway safety plan, is that what it's called? Where DMV is involved, they do a lot of education efforts and enforcement efforts. And localities are developing their Safe Streets for All, which is incorporating not just engineering, education, enforcement, emergency response. So you're right. It's not all about a road project.
Yes, Nora?
So from your line, it looks like it'll go back to 2020 or 2022, which we can't impact.
Correct. So 2021 is the last year for fatalities that we have because it's based on the FARS system. So it's not the state's crash reporting. So it's the federal system on that one. So 2021 is the year that we start as our baseline for fatalities. For injuries, it goes through 2022. So that's another, there's a gap between the two. They have different reporting systems, but yes, we can't impact the past years, obviously.
I'm just thinking if those are gonna be our baseline numbers, there weren't that many cars on the road in 21 and more in 22, less. It's a hard baseline to set when you had, I would think, less vehicle miles traveled, even though I don't know that showed up on your chart. It had like negative 500 or something, 522 million. That doesn't seem like the negative that you would think, but that's over a 4-year span, so maybe. Anyways, that's just a random thought. Now, you mentioned that not meeting our target won't impact us. I feel like it won't impact us now. I mean, if the state is being forced to meet or go down, they're gonna look to us in the projects we're doing. And so it wouldn't surprise me if, 2 years from now, we are being required to meet our goals. So I wouldn't wanna go and set a goal that's too lofty that we can't meet and then be penalized for that.
Right, and I think that, to my point, was really that there is no, at the federal level, there is no review annually where we are measured against these. So the state is in fact annually reviewed against how they did on these targets, and then there's an actual enforcement mechanism, essentially. Ours doesn't exist right now. It's more of just built into our quadrennial reviews and how the program is doing as a whole for the MPO.
It just wouldn't surprise me if that, kept trickled down and the state enforces that we do that. Okay, so we set this goal. What do we do? Do we just put it into a plan, or, does it become part of a scoring system, or do we actively go and do educational sessions? What do we do once we set this goal?
Sure, so these are both included, this is one of several different things that we measure as part of the required federal performance measures, but they all go into the TIP and the long range plan. So everything that we're selecting for the long range plan, and then all of the funding that we're putting into the TIP is then evaluated. So at the end of our TIP, there's a section that discusses the investments that we're planning, how those relate to the targets we've set for safety, and what we're expecting to achieve based on that investment. So it doesn't directly impact policy, but I think one of the things that staff was hoping to do was be able to bring back, if we do set a target that is declining or flat, look at some of the policies we have in place and ideas that we could consider if we want to be more aggressive about trying to achieve a safer system. So that's, I think, something we're open to, is bringing back more suggestions of what policies do we need to achieve this. And that could be built into our next discussion. So, and I don't know if we'll necessarily get to an answer on that, because that's a bigger discussion than setting an annual target. But I think that's something we can start the discussion on and figuring out, well, what do we need to do if we do want to try and bend this curve more aggressively in our region?
Can I ask a question? Oh, thanks. So, I want to go back to what Sulab was saying about understanding, like, really the reasons for the crashes and the fatalities. Are they design or are they human? Because we're talking about COVID, travel went down, but speeding went up, right? I mean, speeding everywhere around the country went way up. And so, which I think probably lent itself to fatalities and severe injuries and crashes. So, and that's human behavior, right? I mean, how many times do I get phone calls, stop the speeding? Well, I can't. Without enforcement and without all these other things, just putting a sign up and, speed display signs has a little bit of an impact, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of impact. And I don't know that any of the design, other than putting in, traffic circles and some traffic calming measures, could really sort of counteract that, right? So I guess when would we know, or what would be the process for getting to that information?
Well, as Sulab said, there's a quarterly meeting today.
Yeah.
And Sarah
okay.
mentioned that. So we can talk to the OIP team there and see what available information we could get.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Part of that, and also in how we do project scoring, is we already look at that to some extent. So I think that's the other piece of this, is like when so Smart Scale, or for RSTP CMAC, for example, we pull out things that are alcohol related crashes, because that's a human behavior that no design is going to be able to fix that. Right. So that's part of what we can do, is look at those pieces in the crash data that we could pull out when we're scoring, to actually make sure we're only picking projects that are fixable through engineering, as opposed to
Right.
Crashes that we can't really do much about from the engineering and the capital improvement side of the program. So I think that's, again, maybe that's one of those policy things, to Nora's point, that we could bring back, of more of a discussion on what other things could we look at, and then figure out that safety program and what that would look like. But this is just one, and I just want to emphasize, this is just one of many of the performance targets that we have to set. So this is the only one that's annual right now. The rest of them we're only setting on 2-year, 4-year basis. But we have multiple other performance targets. So I think looking at those holistically is also helpful. And this is probably a good opportunity to mention there's a new target that we will be required to set for greenhouse gas emissions. So this is something that is going to be this spring. We're going to have to be looking at, because I think our target deadline is going to be this summer, like June or July. So we're going to have to come up with a target pretty quickly on that as well. So this is going to be an ongoing setting performance targets and looking at how our program actually responds. So I think this is a good first start on that, focusing on safety, and then we can move on to the other targets as we have to adopt them.
On that greenhouse gas, is that because of our attainment issue, or is that just something that got passed down, trickled
It's a
down
new
to us?
national
Okay.
performance target. So basically we have to set it for the national highway system, and it's really based on measuring VMT that's being traveled on the major roadways, essentially. So it has to be declining. So that's another one that's a difference from where we've been previously. It would have to be a declining target. So we're expecting more guidance on that today at the OIP, or at the quarterly meeting. So that's more to come on that piece.
So to wrap this up, several people mentioned they like the hybrid approach. Do we have consensus around the hybrid approach to provide some guidance to Miles as he develops the target? I like the hybrid approach as well. Okay.
So next month we'll bring back hybrid targets, and then we'll have the explanation for it, and then TAC should be able to take action on it at that point.
Good. So where we are on the agenda, I think we are transportation updates. Is Tiffany online?
No, she is not.
She is
We do
not?
have-
We-
well, let me double check. I don't believe we have anyone from,
DRPT?
correct.
I can provide that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Your name, please?
Daniel Wagner.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so first things first, I don't know if Tiffany covered this already, but some kind of bittersweet news, but big congratulations to our director, Jennifer DeBrule, who announced her retirement. After more than 30 years of service, she will be concluding her service for DRPT June 4th. So definitely big congrats to her, and also obviously very sad for all of us. So if you're looking to become my boss's boss's boss, the secretary will be looking soon. Just a heads up. Yeah, so we want to again thank her for her service. Similarly, in regards to staffing changes, Tiffany is now our director of transit planning. So we're very proud of her to be moved into that position. And then, let's see. That is all. Let me double check. I think it was mainly the staffing updates there. Oh, well, I guess we also wrapped up our transit ridership incentive program mid-cycle opportunity, which was very successful. It also included some new project categories, including public safety projects related to transit, as well as passenger amenities. And so specifically for the Richmond region, there's some passenger amenities projects. So bus shelters going up in Chesterfield that we were excited to fund, as well as some passenger amenities projects within the city of Richmond as well. So that's a huge win for GRTC and for the region. I'm looking forward to getting those on the ground soon.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Is Adrian or somebody from GRTC able to give an update? Yes.
So this month, GRTC has been working on a major route expansion and frequency upgrades planned for the January booking. That's going to go live January 14th. We've done several public meetings regarding those. We've also received notice from the CBT that we'll have additional funding for more bus stops and amenities improvements. GRTC and our consulting team is working on round 2 of our public engagement for the 10-year transit strategic plan. So we're very excited about that. We're doing engagement from stakeholders, riders, as well as our operations and admin team. As of November, GRTC was fully staffed at pre-pandemic level operator count, allowing us to move forward with service restoration and expansions in the new year, and creating the opportunity to add extra pulse buses into service as trippers, providing additional capacity. That was also featured in the New York Times. Our marketing team would like me to mention that. GRTC has continued working with localities to finalize the operator requirements for the spring launch of additional Link, our new microtransit service that GRTC is running in-house. And then we did have a staffing update. Frank, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, name is Frank. I am the new director for planning and scheduling for GRTC.
That's it for GRTC.
Great. So I was going to ask you about the microtransit service in Hanover, and how is that going? Do you have an update?
I don't at this time.
I have an update.
Okay.
I'm very excited. We're hoping to launch late March, early April. Community engagement's gonna start probably after the holidays, February-ish. And we,
You know, I didn't have my notes in front of me.
yeah, and so I think we've pretty much finalized the map area, and we were able to add the air park in as far as an employment center.
Good. So I wasn't aware of that. There actually is service presently in the Mechanicsville area that was launched a month or so ago. And so that's what I was referring to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we should probably meet about the Ashland one. I'm very excited.
Okay. Adrian?
Do you want me to provide an update?
Yes, if you have one, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so the service started out ramping up slow. We started with like maybe 5 a day, and now we are up to, I think Friday was the numbers I got, like 20, 25 riders. I don't know the specific areas they're coming in, so we can provide you with an update. But yeah, people are taking on and starting to use it.
Starting to figure it out,
Yeah,
yes.
it's
Okay,
exciting.
well, that's exciting. I would love to. And I mean, I'm sure you all will be compiling data. I'd love to know, where the trips originating and where are they going and how close were we in our predictions of where a service would be provided. So this is a new initiative, GRTC. I think they have 5 zones. Hanover was the first zone that was started and with service, and it provides service within that zone, very small area, relatively small area, free of charge to anybody, more or less on demand. So I get that right, kind of. Okay, thank you. Thank you for everybody for that. We have, next up is John with Ride Finders.
Thank you, sir. Van pooling is continuing to trend upward. For the month of November, we did start 2 new 7-passenger van pools from Henrico and New Kent going to Fort Belvoir. Starting in December, we're in January, we're working with groups, 5 van pools total, 2 of them coming from the Chesterfield area to Fort Belvoir, and also 3 others coming from the Hampton Roads area to the Defense Supply Center Richmond in Chesterfield as well. We participated in the ongoing biweekly meetings with Foursquare ITP as related to the CASPS program. We simplified our greener holiday pledge promotions for greener transportation choices for the holiday seasons. And we're working on the launch of the Kickstart Your Carpool pilot program that's set to start on January 1st and run through April 15th. And with that, that'll be all of the updates I have and be answered any questions anybody has.
Thank you, John, for that update. Sarah, you still online with us?
I am still here.
Okay, excellent.
Okay. I'll try and make this quick. So in other news with the CTB meeting last week, there's a very short presentation on the new federal performance measure, greenhouse gas emissions. Miles mentioned that earlier. It's worth a watch. Angel Deem, the VDOT policy chief, does a very good job with that summary, and I think it's a great orientation for the new greenhouse gas emission metric. Also, on the action meeting at last week's CTB meeting was the approval of the streamlined memorandum of agreement between VDOT and CVTA, a new revised standard project agreement template. So that is now final. The next CTB meeting will be January 16th. I have it on good authority that we're going to have VTrans needs discussions at that meeting. Also, VTrans needs are on today's quarterly MPO quarterly review. So I would encourage you all participating, or if you can. Currently, our RRTPO application review is underway. VDOT is doing the estimate review. We'll be reaching out to Miles, and in turn, Miles will be reaching out to you if we need follow-up questions or need any follow-up information. And then for our 2 major projects going on in the region, the Fall Line Trail, construction for DB1 is anticipated to begin in spring of 2024. Let's see, DB2 alignment is currently being finalized, and we're hopeful that we'll have a final alignment this month. I actually am not sure if we do have a final alignment, because I believe the survey was complete last week. I'm trying to remember what Scott said. Advertisement is likely to occur on that one in September 2024. On the I-64 gap, segment A is moving along swimmingly. We had the groundbreaking in November. Segment C, the RFP is on the street, and segment B, the TPO board last week approved the TIP amendment to get that project into the TIP, or the right-of-way and construction phases in the TIP. And then I do have one announcement. The MetroQuest is an online platform to do public involvement for various entities. VDOT has a contract that's open. It's available for use. If you have any interest in utilizing MetroQuest, please reach out to Nicole and I, and we can help facilitate that resource for all of you. And that's everything for me. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for those updates. Future meeting topics, I'll just refer to page 16 of the agenda package. Future meeting topics are listed there. TAC member comments. Does anybody from TAC have anything to share for the good of the committee? Nobody online, nobody present. Okay. So our next meeting is, believe it or not, January 9th, 2024 at 9 a.m. Will we be in person or virtual or hybrid?
Virtual, I believe.
Virtual,
Yes.
back to virtual. Okay, that works. And going once, going twice. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Miles, I don't think so the TAC members get invitation to the quarterly
Where's Amy?
First, we're like, yeah, so this will get resolved, but it might take up to 90 days. I was like, okay, well.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting of the Public Transportation Work Group for Wednesday, December the 12th. I'm Ken Lance, and staff here at Plan RVA, and we're just going to go around the room and introduce ourselves. We'll start with Miles.
I'm Miles Bushing with Plan RVA.
John O'Keefe with Ride Finders.
Daniel Wagner with the RPT.
Trisha Robinson, GRTC.
Barb Smith, Chesterfield County.
Nora Amos, Town of Ashland.
Ashley Austin, Henrico County. Molly Fry, Plan RVA. Terry Ramos, Plan RVA.
Dan Mata, Plan RVA.
Sulabariel, Plan RV staff as well.
And in the back,
John Ayers, Onyx Rail Safety Solutions. Franco Dakwa, GRTC.
Adrian Torres, GRTC.
and how about the folks that are participating virtually?
Lisa Guthrie, CTAC.
Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
This is Grant Sparks with DRPT.
Good morning, Grant. Others that are on?
Mr. Siriello.
Okay. Hi. Mr. Siriello?
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Russell.
And Ms. Russell?
And we have Ms. Clark from
And Ms.
Richmond.
Clark? Okay.
Where Amy is.
Okay. Are there any amendments to the proposed agenda? I don't think we need to take a vote on that. We will just consider the agenda okay as presented then. Open public comment. Do we have anybody from the public who wishes to speak? Okay, we will move to item 5, which is the work group purpose and update. And I'll turn to Miles for that.
I just want to take a few minutes as we get started just to go back over, the purpose of this work group, why we're here, and some of the big questions that we're trying to answer with today's meeting, and just give us a little bit of direction for the discussion that's going to be following. So just as a reminder, the policy board sent this to the TAC, and the TAC sent this to the Public Transportation Work Group. But the direction from the policy board was to review the various funding programs from DRPT that Ms. Dubinsky had presented on, and develop a recommendation for sustainable and fiscally constrained public transportation service for the entire region, which in this case was really focusing on the more rural portions of the region that were lacking in service of some sort. So that's kind of the direction from the policy board. The discussion that we've had to date was making sure that whatever we come up with as a recommendation works well as a regional system and integrates with the entirety of our region's public transportation. So a few of the questions that we wanted to go over and try and get answers from are the options for the scale of this study. So some of the things that we discussed at the last meeting was we can do it as a region-wide study. We could do it as a region-wide study with 2 or 4 sub areas that we're focusing on and have a different chapter for each of the counties or for the east and the west, or we could do county level studies and do 4 separate studies. So that's one of the questions that we're trying to get an answer from this working group. The next part is who is going to lead this study? Is this going to be a Plan RVA and RRTPO led effort? Will GRTC be the lead agency on the study, or will the locality be taking the lead on this study? Funding options, this is something else that we've discussed a little bit, and I think we also need to come up with a recommendation to bring this back to the policy board, but we have several options. So the 5303 funding, which is the transit planning funding that we have as the MPO, that could be built in as part of the UPWP if this was an MPO-led effort. The DRPT technical assistance program, that would work for a non-MPO lead. The reason I've added this in here, and this is one of the big updates, is given the transition in the board at the policy board with the most recent elections and the fact that we've canceled the January meeting, there's really no way for us to make the timeline to be able to apply for that grant this cycle. So it would push it back another year if we were doing that with the MPO as the lead agency. So that's why we put that as a non-MPO lead option. Any GRTC funding, if GRTC has funding to take on the study efforts, or CVTA or local funding. So if there's anything that the localities can bring, that could also be considered in the mix. So this isn't a one and done. This could be a mix of the different funding sources. There's a lot of options on how we go about this, but that's part of what we need an answer from to take a recommendation back to the policy board. And then the timeline is really the other big thing that we're looking at. With 5303 or technical assistance, we could potentially get started in July. So we'd look for funding, get money for the upcoming fiscal year, get started. Anything that was like GRTC funding or local funding could potentially happen sooner depending on the availability of those funds for the different sponsors. So that's the other piece of it. So whether we're looking to start in January, February, or if we're willing to wait till July, that's going to impact the decision on this as well. So that's really everything that I wanted to cover. I'm happy to answer any questions, but we just wanted to lay out some of those options and what we're looking for in direction from this working group.
For more clarity on what we're doing, so am I recalling right, we did a large regional transit study a few years ago, and out of that came these great micro transit projects, and I'm sure lots of other projects around the region. And so is this to supplement that plan because it didn't go all the way out into the rural areas? Is that our purpose?
I think in part that's where it came from. So maybe if I back up a little bit. So that was initially presented to the CVTA and the policy board as part of the effort that this work group put together and working with GRTC. There was some expression from board members at the policy board that didn't quite go far enough. That wasn't the service that they were looking for in their locality. And so the purpose and why they put us all together again was to try and find a solution for those jurisdictions where microtransit wasn't enough and there was something more needed. And so part of what we've been trying to do is figure out what exactly is that so we can scope out a study. So that's really why we're here, is figuring out what that need is and then finding out the scope of the study so we can find a way to solve it. Amy?
Okay, thank you, Ken. I guess that you're really hitting on the purpose of this meeting is, in this group, is to figure out what does rural public transportation really look like? And I think GRTC did a good job in trying to figure out how they could serve those areas. More of a suburban type model in a rural setting doesn't quite go far enough. And that's what we heard repeatedly from the board members. And quite frankly, that's what we're struggling with, because we have rural public transportation right now that's being delivered, very well in our county. And, we're struggling with trying to bring in a suburban type of model and sort of combine that with our rural transit. There's not enough for everybody, right? So I think for us, that question's already been answered, right? We already have a solution for rural transit in New Kent, and I won't speak for Charles City, but we have a partnership with them. So, I think there are things that we would like to do to improve that service, and maybe modernize the way that service is delivered, but fundamentally it works very well. It can cover the area that we're talking about for the microtransit and also covers the rural area. So we really don't have any trouble with that. So I think it's more of a question now for Powhatan and Goochland potentially, and whoever else, maybe Hanover, parts of Hanover, I think they've already have service elsewhere, what they might need. But I do think we're in sort of a dilemma where we have, an urban system trying to serve a rural need, and it can't do everything. So that's where I think maybe the TPO, I don't think it should be GRTC, because GRTC doesn't provide rural service. So maybe the TPO could lead a study where you go in through the UPWP and really look at what are the needs, maybe do a survey, maybe get out and do some good public involvement in these areas and get that feedback, and then look at, well, how could we serve that? How can we provide that service to these people, right? And what models are out there that might be able to do that? To me, that would be a great path forward, and to help sort of get to an answer for these rural areas that aren't quite sure what they need. But for us, we're content with where we are. I don't see us moving forward in a different direction at this time. We're still trying to figure all that out, but we're very happy with the service that we have.
Thank you. Dorona, did you have a comment?
Yes, but if I could concede to Ms. Guthrie first.
Okay. Lisa?
Ken and Miles, maybe you could speak to the plans that Holly Gordon's subgroup has within the Community Transportation Advisory to engage with public hearings and town halls and other things that we have talked about to try to solicit input from residents around the region.
Okay. Holly's not, in our midst today. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that.
I can chime
Miles
in. So as of right now, we haven't done anything for this particular study. So I think part of what what Ms. Guthrie is mentioning is we're updating the public engagement plan right now with the CTAC. And as part of that effort, we're going to come up with the framework of how we do public engagement for the next 5 years until we have to update the LRTP again. So we've kind of a kickoff to the LRTP. But as part of that, we're coming up with the tool set that we'll use to do any public outreach that would go into this study if it was an MPO-led effort as well. So that would lead to an actual engagement strategy. We would go and do surveys, do town halls, do whatever we need to get the input. But that's where we are. But as of right now, we don't have any sort of strategy for this because we haven't gotten to a scope of what the study looks like yet.
Dorona, can I circle back to you?
Yep, thank you. So I was listening what Amy was saying and, asking the question on what does rural transportation look like? And then I was thinking, I'm like, well, in lieu of a rural transportation agency that we don't have, how can we potentially help to accomplish it? And I do think, I guess my first question of clarity is, would the 5303 be the MPO and not the TPO? So I guess that's my first question. And then I do think potentially utilizing the 5303 funds would be good for that effort, because there could be some concerted effort in looking at the state funds through DRPT and their not just their funding, but their assistance to the rural, as well as again, the regional entity, the MPO, the TPO. So I think that that's like somewhat of a good start if we're looking for rural solutions that GRTC, having not been providing those services traditionally, may not have that input, even though it may be some functions that would be a concerted effort of GRTC and other rural providers that can end up implementing some of this stuff. But I do think that looking at it and letting the rules decide what that looks like for them, and then in lieu of having an agency, have the MPO, TPO, and the state help them align those things that they're looking for.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
If I can just chime in one thing about 5303, and I think this is an important consideration in this. So there is a FTA direction on this that the federal match is actually, or the federal share is actually higher for 5303 if it's a lower density and lower income area. So basically for more rural areas where you're trying to provide public transportation to do additional studies, the federal share can be 90 to 100% instead of the usual 80% of the cost. So if we do take this on, there's an application process for that through DRPT. We have to sort of justify why this would qualify. But that is a benefit to potentially doing this through the 5303 funding, is we could get more of it paid for by someone else. So that's, I think, something to keep in mind throughout this discussion as well.
Dorona, did you have another comment, or you just?
I'm sorry, do we have the presentation? Because I feel like Miles had a lot of to-do items and I can't really keep up with like when we're potentially getting towards a solution or a way forward. So either sharing that or putting it
Okay.
in the text so that I can see it, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure,
we can do
I
that.
can share that, and then, we do have an item further in the agenda to actually go through all of these and get to the solution, so
Right.
maybe if we, we wanted to share some of the information that we collected from you guys as well, before we get into the full discussion, just to see where there's broad consensus on a need to help scope
Right.
this out.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I can pull this up for now, and then we can walk through the additional item, or I'm happy to go either way, Mr. Chairman.
Why don't we move to, one of the things that we did to try to get a better handle on some of the thinking around, the direction of the study, some of the needs and so forth, was we administered a survey or a questionnaire, and we appreciate the responses back from that. And I want to ask Dan to go over some of the findings from that.
As a reminder to everyone, this is results from the questionnaire that we sent out to all of you last month. So this is what the rural survey results, item 6 on the agenda. So this is actually questionnaire results, and we do have a link to the questionnaire. So if anybody didn't have a chance to submit, you're still able to submit through that. And we'll send this out to you to review if you'd like later on after the meeting, but just a reminder, this page is designed to be viewed on a desktop computer, so it'll look a little funky on a mobile or smaller screens. So just get into the results here. So the first thing we asked is about groups of individuals in your jurisdictions that experienced the greatest challenges with mobility. And so we saw that the two highest are seniors and people with disabilities, followed by low-income individuals, families, workers, commuters, and then youth. Other entities also include veterans and zero-car households, so those are also represented in the 16%. And like Ken said, we'll have a larger conversation after this, but if you have any questions about the results or the map afterwards, just let me know. So the transportation services currently available within the counties that are represented here, mostly dial-a-ride or demand response. We also see some family and neighbors taking up that responsibility, volunteer drivers as well. And we did have some fixed route bus. Some of the transportation gaps and barriers that you see. The top two are for trip days. The first one, service is not available on the desired day, and also service is not available due to the length or duration of the trip, or the destination is beyond the service area. So those are the two, 21% there. Followed by use of the service requires access to a computer or smartphone, so digital access or lack thereof. Trip times, service is not available at the desired time. Cost, the service is unaffordable. And other entities, or other entries rather, include trip purpose is not served, limit on the number of trips provided, lack of accessible vehicles, and first mile, last mile challenges. Some of the typical trip needs and purposes kind of across the board. But medical is the lead there, followed by work, grocery shopping, all other kinds of shopping, social activities, and school and training as well. So kind of split across the board there for that. We asked you all what types of services would best meet the needs of your county. Dial-a-ride and demand response is far and away most, with 50%, followed by fixed route bus and volunteer driver. And which entities could best provide additional transportation services in your county? GRTC was the highest with the responses, followed by state agencies such as VDOT, DRPT, nonprofit or human service agencies, and CBTA. Those three were tied at 14%. And then followed by private for-profit, Uber, Lyft, U-Serve. And then the other entities, or other entries rather, include local, county government, faith-based organizations, and volunteer organizations. We also included in those others are coordination between Bay Aging and GRTC, and possibly Waynesburg Mass Transit, and Jaunt and Bay Transit. Those were others submitted. And lastly, we asked an open-ended question just about the vision for public transportation in your jurisdiction by 2030. Just put these all on the board, but I'll just highlight a few things. We heard 2 fixed points: courthouse in Roxbury, future park and ride lot, the bus shelter, where Bay Aging could bring people and they could transfer to GRTC to get to Richmond and reverse. Sliding scale rides on demand, more time to dig into opportunities and constraints and to engage the public, better connectivity to GRTC high frequency fixed route service, specifically high frequency and not hourly or half hour service, expanded hours and days for service provided, and then GRTC providing commuter bus service to New Kent County using funds that GRTC receives from New Kent County via CBTA. So, like I said, this questionnaire is still open. There's a link on top of this page if you'd like to submit any more information. But lastly, I would like to highlight the map that we put together. This is just gives a little overview and then some details about the map layers and the legend. But from the survey results, we received this information. So the circles are popular destinations that we heard about. So downtown Richmond and surrounding areas: Mechanicsville, Midlothian, Short Pump, Centerville, Powhatan, or in Goochland rather, Hanover Courthouse, Kings Dominion. And the hatched areas are mobility issue areas. So just areas where you see mobility challenges. And with that, we see most of Hanover County, the zip codes that make over Hanover, all of Charles City, and then in New Kent, these specific areas, so Farms New Kent, near where the new Buc-ee's is coming, Woodhaven Shores, and then Patriots Landing and surrounding areas around there, 5 Lakes. So this is obviously not fully representative of everything. This is what we heard back in the questionnaire. So, but you are able to view this if you'd like. We also include on this map the trip data from Charles City, New Kent, Powhatan. So you're able to look at these in a little more detail if you'd like. This was information that was shared at our last meeting. So that's not new information, but we just put it in this interactive map. And then lastly, we also included destinations. So popular destinations such as grocery stores just in the these counties, so not in Henrico, Chesterfield, or Richmond. But we also include all of the medical facilities, so hospitals, major medical offices, dialysis centers as well. You're able to kind of zoom in on your respective areas. So, any questions about the results or map?
I think, Barb, you have a question?
Yeah, so you didn't hear from anyone with Powhatan or Goochland, or am I just not reading it?
We did. They just didn't identify a specific zip code or neighborhood to map for areas with mobility needs. So yes, their results are in the survey. They're just not mappable.
And we did hear feedback, I think from one or two that just said rural areas as the areas
general.
that- yeah, so kind of just general.
General, yeah. And then one of the questions in the survey said, who should provide transportation, something like that.
Right.
And VDOT and DRPT were listed as potential service providers. So they don't do that.
And the TPO, I think, was also on there. I thought that was really weird.
Yeah, so
I think that was more of an.
like leads people to think that they
Yeah.
do that. And so it skewed your results.
I think that's more of who can help fund and actually provide the service in terms of the funding and availability to operate a service and getting it set up. I think that's what we were driving at. So I think you're correct, though. It was
Mixed bag.
yeah, a mixed bag on there. But the idea was how do we get this set up? If we're going to be setting up a new service, can CVTA chip in? Can we use MPO funding? Do nonprofits set it up and run it? Like what? How do we run this service? But I to your point, I think it potentially should have been two separate. How do we fund it? Who runs it?
Yeah, and even, you know, if you're just focused on operating, the state's gonna maybe help you during the demo stage, but after that.
It's operating assistance.
Yeah.
And it's rural operating assistance, not urban.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I guess I keep hearing you say we need to, start up this service and this and that, but I think you're missing the point that we already have rural transit service serving at least half of the rural counties. The rural counties that aren't being served, Goochland and Powhatan, and I don't know if they're participating in this or not, were the two localities that requested this thing. So they're not at the table that I can see. So to me, that's a fundamental gap in what we're trying to accomplish here. So you're asking the rural localities who already have transit service. We've not asked for anything to come out and change what we're doing, but yet you don't seem to acknowledge the fact that this service is already being provided. And so that's a little bit concerning to me because we keep saying that, but you're not acknowledging it in a fundamental way. You keep putting GRTC up there when they don't provide rural transit service.
Right.
Okay, this is a problem. Does the TPO understand what GRTC does versus what rural transit providers need to do? And that we already have a rural transit provider that's serving half of this region very well. Again, there are things that, yes, we need to improve on and the service that's being provided, which I think are absolutely achievable. But we don't need to come in and replace what we already have.
No, and
So
that's-
fundamentally, that's where I'm having a little bit of trouble with
So
this, that you
acknowledge
need to
that
get
Mike
to
is
the
on.
people who originally requested this study.
And that's it's certainly not our intent, Amy. If the localities are satisfied with what they have, then we're certainly not going to propose or dictate a solution otherwise. I think we benefit from the knowledge and experience that the localities that have had some rural service can bring to this discussion. Hanover, has now has the
They've got
Hanover
their
Dash
service.
service, and I think there's some lessons learned from that could be applicable perhaps to localities like Powhatan or Charles City.
Charles City's already been
Goochland.
served.
Right.
So, Amy, if I can, I think GRTC has been working with Goochland on fixed route expansion. GRTC's also been working with Powhatan on potential options to augment their existing ride assist service. So I think GRTC is working with a portion of the rural region. So I think that's part of the issue. I think there may be a different solution on the east and a different solution on the west, and that may be the answer that we ultimately settle on. But I think that's why we wanted to raise this, that we are seeing some interest on that side. And other interest on Bay Transit already exists, and you like each service you have. So how do we make Bay Transit and GRTC work together so that you can get where you need to?
So that's the other misnomer that I want to make sure that's clear. Bay Transit is already connecting in to GRTC.
Right.
They have they can absolutely
that
connect in to the service. They don't have a boundary. that they can't cross. We have mobility beyond boundaries. Okay, they could go into downtown Richmond if that's something that we see that we need.
Right.
Okay, I will say that the issue with trying to connect into GRTC is all the transfers that would be required and the time that it would take to get to where you want to go. Okay, so that's where we're saying if it's going to be efficient, then eventually we would like to have a commuter bus service that comes out to our Bottoms Bridge Park and Ride, which VDOT's working with us right now to construct it. It's going to be, we're going to have it so that it's going to accommodate the buses to come in, to come out easily. We're going to have bus shelters. It's going to be accessible. So we're preparing for that. And Bay Transit can connect into that without any trouble. Okay. And again, they can connect into GRTC, but until GRTC system is something that would be a reasonable option for people, it's not going to be a choice that people are going to want to take. So there, in that case, it would be helpful for GRTC to work with us a little closer on how can we improve that connectivity. And then again, we were asking for the commuter bus coming, in a year or two, whenever that makes sense, but we think that that's a reasonable service for GRTC to provide. And that might be a first step for us in that regard with GRTC.
And I think another thing that we have realized, although it should be almost intuitive, and that is from the results of our questionnaire, if you will, is that so many of the trips need to go across jurisdictional boundaries. That if we start working on a system design that is only internal to the rural counties, I don't think we will be serving the needs that are there. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. And I think that, Joe, you all have recognized that with your Hanover Dash, that you go, 7 miles, I think, into Richmond, which takes you a pretty good distance. So that will certainly be a consideration going forward.
John? Just had a question for Dan. How many responses did you get or have you gotten so far?
From the questionnaire?
Yeah.
7.
7?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, Barb?
So have Goochland or Powhatan considered going after a technical feasibility or technical grant through DRPT? I think those applications, like Miles was saying, are due February 1st. That's kind of the route that we've taken in the past. Is our first step is to get some study money from DRPT to look at where we want to expand transit or introduce transit, and use that as the information that we would need to develop estimates and durations and service area to go after a demo grant in the future. It seems like that would be a logical.
So I think that's what we're trying to get to, and Mike's online from Powhatan, but I think what we're trying to get to from today is, are we splitting this? Do we really want to look at the two ends of the region separately? Do we want to try and do it all as one big study? And I think that's what we're trying to get a recommendation on. So we can go back to the policy board and say, yes, we thought through this, but what we're going to do is Goochland and Powhatan want to do this as their own study that ties back into the system, and Charles City and New Kent will continue working with Bay Transit to come up with the solution that they need, and that might be the answer. But I think that's the next piece of the discussion of what we want to get is what is the best way to do this for this?
What's the best approach?
Yeah.
So can I just ask, so you've heard from us, and I don't know if Charles City is on, but I've had conversations with Rhonda. And we are having our own conversations with Bay Transit to understand where does this all fit, right? Because those are questions that we need to answer too. But have we heard from Goochland and Powhatan on what they want? Because again, it was their board members that requested this.
Right.
And it was because the microtransit service and what GRTC could offer, which was, I think they were being good and trying to expand and do what they could. So I'm not saying that what they were doing was wrong. It just didn't cover the entire area, right? And so that's what I heard from the board members, especially Powhatan. Mr. Williams was very clear that it didn't go far enough, and that we need, it's not one answer is not a silver bullet for everybody. It's multiple things that are required, right?
Right.
So that's where I think the GRTC model fell short, and that's why we're here.
Right. I think Adrian and the gentleman next to you, I think you all had some comments.
Sure, just to kind of give a state of where we are, and the other jurisdictions hopefully are on as well. But we did talk to Mr. Williams and had an opportunity to meet with Mike and Brett after we kind of introduced the micro transit and they had identified as a pilot, knowing that that's not going to fulfill all the needs of Powhatan County. So we have done a subsequent study to look at it more of the actually dash model, very similarly paratransit, and a kind of entering the final stages of that approach to look at something that would work specifically for them and coming up with costs and all of that to go with it and looking at various funding models to make it somewhat sustainable to include rural funds. I also, to add to that, just because we not necessarily operate in every single sort of mode today, I think the argument can be made that we operate in all of Henrico County, and Henrico County, of course, has different sort of densities throughout it in terms of our paratransit service. To make the same kind of statement, we didn't operate a BRT. We do today, and as far as our operators, we can hire operators that are very, I guess, specific to different modes, and microtransit will actually be its own mode as well in terms of a unit. I think Amy has a lot of great points. They have Bay Transit, which is great, and I think there is a way to complement each other. Whatever that is, I think we have to figure it out. And then as far as Goochland, someone mentioned earlier, we are extending our Route 19, but we have had some intro conversations and do know that they have additional needs that do need to be looked at beyond that. And the last one, I'm not sure if Rhonda's on, but we have had some great conversations with Charles City County and are kind of looking at doing a study that complements what's been identified through the microtransit, but knowing that may not be the only model that fits. Let's do an assessment to see in parallel, move forward with microtransit, but also see how that can be complemented with other services that can complement them, and then bring that to basically a cost starting line and let the jurisdictions kind of make the decision there. So we are supportive, whether it's just doing the study to figure out what it is, even if we're not the operator, figure out how we complement each other with whether it's a service that already exists. We know like on Goochland's side, they already have Jaunt that borders it. So what is it that really can give us, honestly, that regional model working with who already exists? And of course, looking at Nor, she's already spoken, but Ashland is bleeding over into, of course, Hanover with the microtransit. I think there's great regional connection for that because it almost will hit what Henrico wants to do, which is extend their Route 1 all the way to BCCS. And if those two merge together, that's a pretty powerful system that connects all the way up there to our whole system. So I would say even with Bay Transit, not Bay Transit, but New Kent, being able to somehow connect to a fixed route, whether that's us or someone else, I would say would be huge as far as local or express route.
Yeah, you do. It's just the service isn't good.
Are there other comments? Didn't want to. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to seek clarification from Dan. Where were who were these surveys sent to?
Members of this work group.
Of this work group, okay.
Right. It was the TAC members, the individual jurisdictional representatives.
Thank you.
Were surveyed. Do we want to circle back, Miles, to some of the discussion about?
Maybe I can put the PowerPoint back up on the questions we're trying to answer, because I think the conversation's starting to drive that way.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the TPO advance with developing a scope through your UPWP 5303 money that will work in collaboration with the rural localities to have public engagement and also to determine more fully exactly what the needs are and then what would be the possible solutions to provide that service. And the other thing of that is looking at the model. If rural counties are now becoming part of GRTC, what does that governance structure look like? And what is the cost to the localities to provide that service? Because it's very expensive. So I think those items, also governance and ongoing cost. A demonstration project is 3 to 5 years. Once you start it, you don't stop, right? So then who's going to pay that? Who's going to pay for that? And what is that cost? Because that's something that the localities, especially rural localities, need to fully understand. So I think public engagement, service types, governance structure, cost are the 4 things that really need to be discussed.
Miles is typing away, trying to get that down. Well, let's return to that discussion a little bit, if we could.
So I'm just pulling back up. So I think if we can answer these two, this makes it cleaner. Just in terms of, so it sounds like 5303 was
I made a motion.
Amy's motion, that's
Yeah,
correct.
it needs a second, but I made a motion.
Is there a second to Amy's motion?
I think I'd reconsider it. I'd like to continue with the discussion and then maybe
Okay,
come back to that.
that's fine. Sure.
You willing to let your motion just lay for a little while?
I'm having discussion. That's
Okay,
absolutely sure.
all right. Okay. Joe, do you have a?
No, I just, we were headed towards
Right,
circling
right.
back to what the questions
Gotcha,
were, and
right.
that's.
Okay.
Sure. So I mean, the first thing I think we need to clarify is the scaling options. So are we going to treat this as one study that is just looking at the entire regional rural area and then that connection into the full regional system? Or do we want to take a look at each end separately? And Joe, please weigh in too. If Hanover would like to be included as well, I think we have space for that. I was focused on the 2 ends and forgot to put Hanover in here too, but Hanover was included as part of the original focus of this work group. So that's the second option, would be kind of a sub-area focus. So one study, but really look at different solutions on either end, because it sounds like from what I'm hearing in the conversation is the western end and the eastern end may have very different approaches of what we're doing. Or even at a jurisdictional level and kind of do 4 different sub areas, similar to how the microtransit study had different and for each jurisdiction. Or ultimately the alternative is a county level or 2 counties doing their own study, that sort of thing, towards Barb's point earlier. So I think this is the first question on scope that we'd like clarity on. So I don't know if just want open discussion on each of these as we work through them, or.
Does Tyrone have her hand up? And is someone checking the chat? Because I know Mike had chimed in.
Yes, Mike gave a thumbs up earlier. When,
Okay.
Adrian was giving the summary of what they'd done with Powhatan.
Okay, thumbs up back.
So Dora's her hand raised.
Chair, yep.
Dorna, go ahead.
So I'm just looking at these 3 things, and yeah, like Miles was saying, I could hear where Barb was talking on the county level. With Amy's motion, it sounded more like the first one, only in that it would integrate bullet 2 into the bigger transit conversation, which I think is where that whole the governance and some of the other kind of cost and responsibility of the rural locality would definitely come into play. So I don't know, to ease, and of course we would use the existing transit governance to integrate and maybe review. So maybe it is beneficial to do bullet number 2. And then from bullet number 2, potentially it could evolve into that. It could then be a phase 2 that then merges the 2. I just feel like there's a lot of work that potentially that would need to be done, and even if it's potentially scope phase 1 and 2, if that goes with Amy's motion, I think that would be good. But I think that she said a lot, and the broader on the governance and some of that, incorporating them into the bigger regional transit picture is another large bite. So maybe putting them into 2 bites might be good for us.
Okay. Other thoughts on this? Go
I
ahead.
really want Joe to chime in on Hanover.
I'm really just kind of conflicted here and just trying to process it all. It is, I really, am struggling a bit, as to really the best way to view this. And kind of thinking of Hanover and the needs as I understand them and just how that fits, in the entire region, really. And, yeah, anyway.
We have asked for ridership data from Hanover Dash, so we can get an idea of your current picture with Hanover Dash as far as the coverage and destinations and
It was enlightening to see some of the,
so, but we haven't gotten it yet.
some of
So
the,
that's
some of
in
the
the works.
results in terms of users, and where the needs are. You know, a question, we kind of asked that in the survey. A question that I would love to hear answered is, if we wipe the slate clean, money is not an object, and you were asked citizens, what would be your idealized vision for ridership? I'm not even gonna call it transit, for
mobility?
For mobility, yes, that is the word. But, yeah, as a starting point, what would that be? Okay, and maybe the first answer is to have my own car that I'm licensed to drive, would might be the very first answer of mobility, okay? But then what is the next answer, and so forth? And you know, I got into thinking about Uber, and I'm surprised that wasn't higher on the list, because it's hard for me to speak because I don't, I'm not in, fortunately, in a lot of cases, not in the same position a lot of other users are. And so it's really difficult for me to really appreciate what the needs are. One of the things that we did in responding is that we reached out to our social service agency and had the director or staff person provide the responses, because I don't have that appreciation of what the needs are. That's really what is I'm struggling with, is what are the needs, and understanding that might help me better to respond to, well, what should be the scope and scale of the analysis. So that's kind of where I am.
And I think your point is well taken, because there's a couple of different ways to look at it. One would be, are we designing a system to serve primarily those who have no other options, the elderly, persons with disabilities, low income, or are we looking more to a service for the general public? And some of the systems and services that are out there, you have to meet certain qualifications in order to use the service. So, there's that discussion, I think, as well.
Yes, yeah, most definitely.
Lisa,
Mike
Yeah.
have comments on that.
Lisa?
Yes,
Lisa, go ahead.
I have a question for clarification on the study scale options. I'm assuming that the regional study, or the regional study with the up to 4 jurisdictions, would be conducted by the Plan RVA staff or contractors to them. What about the county level study? Would that be each county being responsible for their own study and then providing it back to the TPO? Just trying to figure out who's responsible for what and the staffing and cost involved in that.
Right.
I think, yes, ultimately, if it was a county level effort, that could be undertaken by the county reporting back to the TPO, the county moving it forward on their own, the county working with GRTC. I think there's a lot of options on how that would potentially work. But yes, for the regional studies, ideally that would go through either DRPT or 5303 funding. So it would be more of a broader look, and it would include multiple jurisdictions and try and get that regional lens on the study. And Mike also had a comment.
All right, Mike?
He's not able, he put something in the chat. He said, I think there's two ways to look at this. One, if this were a wholly new concept, then don't divide geographically. Since it appears that work has begun on several fronts, I believe Goochland and Powhatan should be working together in the West. In addition, I think, and I haven't been here long enough to know confidently, that the West is different from the East in terms of built environment, demographics, density, et cetera. So I think that that's kind of lending itself toward the middle point of splitting an East-West look at the two focus areas.
So I think I would add also from DRPT's perspective, one of the things that is a pinch point that Miles identified is when we look at funding the approach. If, Joe, you wanted to look more holistically throughout the region around mobility, that would take technical assistance out of it because that has to be funding just transit specific. However, it does not preclude you from still going through the 5303 that can be used for any transportation planning regionally. And it would still qualify you for the waiver that Miles identified if it's complete streets planning, so focused away from single occupancy vehicle planning, but it could be a range of mobility options, not just transit. So if you really wanted to expand that a little bit, I think that is probably your best route. However, I think to Amy's point, which was a very good one, is there needs to be a deeper dive into what the scope should look like. And so however this group and then the policy board wants to approach that, I think is fine. But one of the biggest things that we're, I think, identifying as a group is the scope is probably the number one piece so that we can understand what each locality is getting themselves into and then also the body as a whole.
So I think, I mean, just following up on that, if we can get to a tentative scope, and maybe we don't take action today, but if we can get to a tentative scope and we can bring something back to you to actually be able to move forward with, and because ultimately this needs to go back to TAC, so you're all going to see it again at the TAC level, and then it's going to go on to the policy board. So that I think that works, and I think that might respond to some of these issues of like making sure that we're including all the different elements like the cost and how would governance be factored in and all the different pieces that we've heard so far. So if we have enough of a consensus on the different items, we can bring something back of more of a fleshed out scope for the project. But that's really what we need input on to piece that all together. So
We'll move to
the next slide.
Right.
Okay. So the second question we had was lead agency. It sounds like from the discussion so far, the choices seem to be either a locally led or a TPO led. And it sounded like there's support in general for the TPO leading the planning effort on this one. Is there any other comments on that piece?
Okay, we'll take that as consensus, I guess.
So that leads us to 5303, because that is the most accessible for the MPO based on timelines. So that would just be built into the next work program and would be submitted to DRPT with our request for the 5303 for the upcoming fiscal year.
And to your point, that is the most flexible and from the funding sources, so it wouldn't be limiting us really in terms of scope.
Right, I think the local sources would be just as flexible, so if somebody wanted to use CVTA local or anything like that, we're happy to use that as well, but.
Gotcha, but, gotcha.
So, yeah, 5303 would be flexible, and there is the waiver available, so we could potentially get additional federal funding out of it. So that's a benefit. And then timeline, that puts us at a July 1 start would be the start for the study. So it'd be next fiscal year. So we do have the long range plan will also be kicking off. So that'll be factored into how we develop the schedule and everything, because we will be pretty hands-on, all hands-on for that effort as well. So it'll be nice because if we can complete this quickly, it'll also be able to feed into the long range plan as well for the project. So I think there's a nice timing on that. It's just it's going to be a busy time for us this way. So I guess really the only question we didn't specifically hit on was whether we want bullet 1 or 2. I'm hearing a general consensus around number 2. if we're gonna move forward with the MPO-led effort. So if there's not anything objecting to that, that's the approach we'll take on scoping.
Meaning in east-west,
Right.
not the four
And
jurisdictions.
maybe Hanover as well.
Right.
Right. I mean, I see us more west, but I don't know if geographically if that's actually a true statement, but I think we identify more. That's not a slight at all, but I think we just identify more with the western portion of the region rather than the east.
Barb, you have a comment?
It seems like the study could start just by taking a look region-wide, like the first chapter, looking region-wide.
Same thing.
And talking about existing and perhaps a vision for the future, which is gonna be pretty big.
Right.
But then zooming in and really on, focusing on the regional east-west and trying to develop some sort of short-term, near-term solutions. And maybe focusing on those who don't have transportation options, and then as a bonus, if it's available to everyone.
Right. Good point.
Trying to develop something that's really attainable.
Right.
So that we don't just have kind of this.
And to the comments that were made, and something that is sustainable as well.
Yeah, which goes to the funding part.
Right.
Mike had a.
Yeah, Mike put another comment in the chat.
Go ahead.
He said, I think the bigger core counties should participate in both sub-studies since those are the destinations for both east and west riders. So I think the idea would be, it would be this full working group as the kind of the steering committee, it kind of sounds like, so that we have the core, the bigger jurisdictions, and then also the rural areas that we're trying to improve service in. And so that's the making sure it all meets and works nicely together.
That makes sense.
And Dorona has a hand up.
All right, Dorona?
Thank you. I just had a point of clarity for Barb's little bit about like the introduction on the regional and the vision, and just making sure that one, if it's going to be literally tied to this rural concept regionally, or if we're looking at the overall network. And then with that, I just say we take in consideration the existing plans underway, TSP, all those other things that impact if we are going to lift it up in any way. Just so that, but otherwise, I think if we take that approach and how this plan will impact the regional transit and the vision that the rurals have for their integration, I think that would be good.
Okay.
So in response to that, what I was thinking was, Amy's brought up the commuter service that they're trying to get the park and ride, commuter service into GRTC system. They've got Bay Transit already connecting to GRTC system. So that big picture, regional overview, and how all this could work together. In kind of a general way, but really spending the bulk of the work effort to identify near-term options to provide the service at those 4 jurisdictions that connect origins and destinations.
Yeah, and I got it. So I agree. So I think that, after the study is complete and then comparing kind of the executive summary in the beginning of the document to the rest of it would be good. I was just thinking like, how are we going to do it beforehand? But I got it now. Thanks.
Are there any other comments on the study scope or timeline? Have we addressed our questions, Miles? Do you think we have enough direction
Yes,
there?
I think we have enough. So
Okay.
we can bring back a draft scope, I think, for this working group's review. And then what we ultimately need is a vote to recommend this up to TAC. So that's really the one item that we want action on. So if we can hold another meeting to review the scope a little bit more in depth and then move that forward. Or we can vote to direct that today and we just bring that to the TAC level. I think either way works. We have enough information from you to draft something. And
My motion is still on the table.
Yeah.
Right.
So you have a motion on the table. It hasn't been seconded, but I'm willing to refine the motion. For it to be regional study with the 2 east and west jurisdictions, looking at what the needs are, because I think they are different. We have different starting points. And how those potential services can connect in to the core, right, into GRTC's network, whether that's commuter bus or directly connecting into routes. And then I think we need to look at what the general costs would be, like what a cost structure would be. It's going to be really important for rural localities to understand that. And then governance, whether that's, I know it's not going to get into the detail, but it can't be ignored, because I don't think localities are going to pay into a system that we don't have a say, or we don't have a vote. And I can tell you that there are other examples in this region that people could look at, okay? Or not in this region, but in Virginia. And then also the other piece of that is to really have the public involvement, and whether that's the CTAC really engaging in that. I think that's a great idea. I didn't know that was happening. So whether they could take that on and really kind of come up with a public engagement process for this would be ideal. And I also just want to make the comment that it needs to be TPO, but the localities have to, it's not all on you, right? Localities have to have, skin in the game here. And so we have to have our responsibility back to the TPO and to this effort, so that it's not just looking, okay, we have these, regional, and that's that, right? We've got to be able to contribute to that from the local level. So I think there has to be a commitment from everybody to do that. So that would be my motion, if that can be a motion.
All right.
So, and if I forgot anything, let me know.
Can I ask her a question about our motion?
Sure.
Okay.
I think I heard you say needs, but I go back to what Joe said. I'd really like to make sure in the beginning, we're making sure that there's a need.
Yeah.
Before saying, hey, this is what you're gonna do.
Well, yeah, of course, that's where the public involvement.
I thought I heard you say it, but I couldn't remember.
Yeah, the needs, the public involvement, like what do the localities really need, right? I mean, that is the core reason of why we're even here. So that's fundamental number one, and that's kind of goes back to the regional study with the 2 east-west options.
Okay. Any further discussion about Amy's motion? We just want to ask for a voice vote?
I don't think we have a second
Or
yet.
do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we've got it. I think the last thing would be, are we in a position to try to schedule a follow-up meeting, Miles? Barbara?
Were there any nays or abstentions?
Did you ask for no votes?
Any no votes on the motion? I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry?
Oh, just silent.
Yeah.
Mike, I don't think you can
Right.
beam in.
Okay, so the motion passes. So our next meeting, I'll look to you, Miles, Bart.
I think this seemed to have worked okay today, so if we just do another virtual meeting after the next TAC meeting on January 9th, I think that is, and just do a quick follow-up, because hopefully we'll just have that, everything that we need in place. And the motion, we'll bring back that draft, and then the motion is at the next meeting would be to forward it to the TAC. Is that correct in my understanding of where we are? Or
So you're gonna draft the scope, send it out to this group.
Right.
And bring it back to.
And then the TAC would then have comments on it and vote on it?
Yes.
Okay.
So is am I understanding the motion correctly that, Amy, you were advancing it to the TAC without coming back to this work group?
I'm open to amending the TAC. I mean, I think this group needs to probably have a first shot at it and then get it to the TAC, but that
Okay.
could be, send it out to this group, give everybody here a chance to provide you comments. And then from there, it can go to the TAC for final review, since this is kind of a broader group than
Yeah.
our TAC.
And we do
I
have
think.
a motion for the scope of it, so I think that works, because that's enough to recommend it up to the TAC. So we'll draft something, get it back to you. There's the holidays in between, so we'll try and get that earlier rather than later. And then we'll just put it on the TAC agenda, and we won't need a follow-up transportation work group meeting then.
Okay.
So,
Unless this group has a lot of comments.
right, unless we need to come back,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
And we have time, right? This is gonna be part of your UPWP work program.
Correct.
Right.
So
So
we
you're
have
starting
a
to
little extra
develop that.
time now. The
Right.
time pressure's gone.
So even if this goes into February,
Right,
we're
that's what I was
okay.
gonna
So I mean, I would
suggest.
rather give people enough time to,
It could go into February.
I think it could go, and then it still gives you time to get it into your work program and go through that process, right? So can we make it
February TAC and stuff?
a February TAC meeting, just because of the holidays and
Yeah,
everything?
that actually works better for me.
Okay, and that just takes the pressure
All
off.
right, yeah,
Okay.
me too.
Great.
All right. Okay. So, well, I think unless there are further comments, then we stand adjourned.